In this video, I am going to share with you a step-by-step pattern of making this crochet Damarukam, which can make a cute car accessories or keychains. So let's get started. Hey guys, welcome to DIY Crafts. For this project, I am using 4-ply 100% cotton yarn and a 2.5 mm crochet hook. Now let us begin by making a magic circle. So this is a half white color. So take the starting tail end in your left hand and wrap a loop on your hand as shown in the video. Now from the center, insert your hook, pull up a loop, adjust the circle and make chain 1. This is the magic ring. Now let's start making the first row. Insert your hook into the center, take the yarn, come out of the center, yarn over and make one single stitch. So if you are a beginner, I would suggest you to put a stitch marker on top of this first single stitch. So this stitch marker marks the beginning of the first row. Now repeat the same thing, insert the needle into the center and make the second single stitch, 3, and then continue. We are going to make total of 8 single stitches in the center. Now again, we have 3 completed. Now this is the 4th single stitch, 5, 6, 7 and 8. Once all the 8 stitches are completed, pull the starting tail end tightly and this closes the magic center. Now remove the stitch marker and identify the stitch from which you are taking out the stitch marker. Now let's start making the second row. Now on the top of the first stitch, that is from the stitch where we have take out the stitch marker, insert your hook and make one single stitch in that one. So this marks the beginning of the second row. So put a stitch marker into this first stitch, just the stitch which we have just made. So that's the first single stitch of the second row, and into the same stitch put your needle again and make one more single crochet. So the stitch which we have done is called as a single crochet increase, which means 2 single crochet stitches worked into the same stitch. Now we are going to repeat the same thing in all the stitches. So make 2 single crochet stitches in the second row. So that's the second single stitch increase. Now into the next stitch, make 2 more single stitches. So that's 1, and into the same stitch, make 1 more single stitch. So that completes the third single crochet increase. Now repeat the same thing throughout the row until you reach the starting point. So you will have a total of 8 increases in the second row, which will give you a total of 16 single crochet stitches by the end of the second row, and you will get a round shape. Now remove the stitch marker and let's start making the third row. Insert into the next stitch and make one single stitch. Now put the stitch marker in that. So that's one single stitch. And now in the next stitch, make a single crochet increase. So that's first single stitch, and in the same stitch, make one more single stitch. That's the increase. Now for the third row, we are going to repeat this pattern of one single stitch and one increase throughout the row. That's one single stitch and one increase. This is the second repetition. Likewise, we have to repeat this pattern for a total of 8 times. As we have completed the second repetition, now we are doing the third repetition. One single stitch and one increase. That's the third repetition. And we have to repeat it for 5 more times throughout the row until you reach the starting point, and the pattern remains the same. That's one single stitch and one increase. Now here I am making the last increase of the third row. So one stitch and one increase. This completes the third row with 24 single stitches. Now remove the stitch marker and let's start making the fourth row. Begin with one single stitch and then put the stitch marker back into this new stitch, and this marks the beginning of the fourth row. That's one single stitch, and then in the next stitch make one increase, that is 2 single stitches worked into the same stitch. and then in the next stitch we have to make one single stitch. So this is the pattern which we have to follow for the fourth row. One stitch, one increase and one stitch. Together that's the pattern. We have to repeat it for 8 times. So continue one stitch. Now this is one single stitch increase. And in the next stitch make one stitch. So that's the second repetition. One stitch, increase and one stitch. Now let's start making the third repetition and likewise continue it until the starting point, until you have repeated the pattern for 8 times, and by the end of the fourth row we will have 32 single crochet stitches. Remove the stitch marker and let's start making the fifth row. Begin with one single stitch and then put the stitch marker back to mark the beginning of the fifth row. So the pattern for this row is 3 single crochet stitches and increase. So that's 3 single stitches. The first one which we have done, we have already put the stitch marker on it. And then in the next stitch, make one increase. So 3 stitch and 1 increase. And we have to repeat this pattern for total of 8 times. Now we are doing the repetition of second time. That's 2, 3, and in the next stitch, make 1 increase. So that's the second repetition, 3 stitch and increase. Repeat it throughout the row for total of 8 times, and by the end of the row we will have 40 single stitches. So that's the last increase of the fifth row. Now fifth row is completed. Remove the stitch marker and let's start making the sixth row. So for this row we have to begin with one single stitch and put the stitch marker back to the stitch, and this marks the beginning of the sixth row. Now the pattern for sixth row is 2 single stitch, increase and 2 single stitch. So that's the second single stitch, that's 1 and 2. Now we have to make an increase, that's 1, and in the same stitch make 1 more, that's increase, and now 2 more single stitch, that's 1 and 2. So the pattern 2 single stitch, increase and 2 single stitch. Now we have to repeat this pattern throughout the row for 8 times. Now we are doing the second repetition, that's 1 single stitch, second single stitch. Now we have to make an increase, that's 2 single stitches into the same stitch. Now 2 stitches, that's 1 and 2. That completes the second repetition. Now repeat this pattern throughout the row until you reach the starting point, and you will repeat the pattern for 8 times, and by the end of this row we will have 48 single stitches and this pattern will look flat. Remove the stitch marker and let's start making the 7th row, and for the 7th row begin with one single stitch and put the stitch marker back to mark the beginning of the 7th row. Now just make one single stitch in each and every stitch throughout the row, and the count will remain the same as we are not making any increases. In row 7 we will have same 48 stitches just like in row 6. Just continue to make one single stitch in each and every stitch throughout the row until the starting point is reached, and if you check the count you should get 48 single stitches. Now this completes the 7th row. Now we have to fasten off the yarn. Cut it by leaving a tail end of 2 to 3 inches. Now pull out the yarn from the hook. Now remove the stitch marker in the next stitch. Now we have to join the last row with the previous row to have a smoother finishings. So for that I am using a tapestry needle. So insert the tail end into the tapestry needle. Skip the next chain, the next stitch, and in the later stitch we have to join the yarn. So insert the hook into the later stitch as shown in the video. Now pull the yarn out of that stitch. Now into the last stitch, insert the needle into the back loop and also into the back bump of the last stitch. So this will give you a cleaner finishing of the project. Now turn your project onto the back side. Secure the yarn by making a simple knot. Insert the needle into any of the loops of the stitches and then make a simple knot. Once the tail end is secured, we'll just weave in the excess thread into the project. If not, you can just leave it because it will be a part of the stuffing. Anyways, we are not going to identify any of the tail ends because the stuffing will cover up all those things. So just weave in into a couple of stitches, and you don't have to trim the excess thread. You will just leave it there. Now the starting thread where we have the magic ring, insert the tail end into the tapestry needle and secure it by making a simple knot at the beginning, and this will secure the magic ring from coming undone. So this is the circle part. Now let's change the color for the next row. You can insert it into the back loop of any of the stitches of the last row. So insert it into any of the stitches of 7th row, only into the back loop. Now take the brown color yarn and put it on the hook and pull out a loop. So this is how we attach the second color yarn. Begin with chain 1, and we will ignore this chain 1 as a stitch. Now into the same stitch, into the same back loop, make one single stitch. So this is the starting of your 8th row. Put a stitch marker on top of this, and this marks the beginning of 8th row. Now for this 8th row, the pattern is 5 single stitch, SC decrease and 5 single stitch, and it should be worked only in the back loops. So let us continue. Insert the hook into the back loop of the next stitch. Take the yarn and then make a single stitch. So that's 2. Again into the back loop of the next stitch, make next single stitch. That's 3, 4 and 5. So while making the stitches only in the back loops, it will leave the front loops, which will give you a nice edging texture for the project. Now insert the needle into the next stitch and drop a loop. Again insert the needle in the later stitch, drop a loop. Now we have 3 loops on the hook. Yarn over and draw the yarn through all 3 loops at a time. So that is the single crochet decrease. And now let's continue 5 more single stitches. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So this is the pattern which we have to repeat for our 8th row. 5 stitch, decrease and 5 stitch. So we'll repeat it for a total of 4 times. Let me show you for the second repetition. So let's continue. Insert the needle only into the back loop of the next stitch. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. After 5 single stitches, we have to make a decrease. So insert the needle into the first stitch, drop a loop. Insert the needle into the next stitch and drop another loop. We'll have 3 loops on the hook, yarn over and draw the yarn through all 3 loops at a time. So that's the decrease, and let's continue the remaining 5 stitches. So that's 2, 3, 4 and 5. So this completes the second repetition, and if you see, the shape is slowly turning inwards. So after completing all the 4 repetitions, this completes the 8th row with 44 single stitches. Now remove the stitch marker and let's start making the 9th row. So insert the hook on top of the first stitch and start making the 9th row directly. We don't have to make any slip stitches here. Put the stitch marker on the top of the first stitch to mark the beginning of the 9th row. And for the 9th row, we are going to make one single stitch on top of each and every stitch. So just make one single stitches on each and every stitch throughout the row until you reach the starting point. And you will have the same count as 44 single stitches by the end of the 9th row. Now we are making the last single stitch of the 9th row. Now remove the stitch marker and let's start making the 10th row. Let us begin by making the first single stitch, and for the 10th row the pattern is 9 single stitch and 1 decrease. Now put a stitch marker on top of this first stitch to mark the beginning of the 10th row. So that's 1 stitch already completed. Now we are making the second single stitch, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that's 9 single stitch, and now we have to make a invisible decrease. Now insert the needle into the front loop of the next stitch. Turn your needle and insert the needle into the front loop of the next stitch, both at a time. Now take the yarn, bring the yarn out of these front 2 loops and drop a loop. Now you will have 2 loops on the hook, yarn over and make a single stitch. So that is an invisible decrease, and that set we have to repeat it for the 4 times in the row. Now I am making the last invisible decrease of this row. So insert the needle into the front loops of the next 2 stitches at a time. Drop a loop, yarn over and make a single stitch. So that's the last decrease. This completes the 10th row with 40 single stitches. Now remove the stitch marker and make 1 single stitch in the next stitch. And this is the beginning of 11th row. So put a stitch marker on top of the first stitch. Now continue to make 1 single stitch in each and every stitch throughout the row until you reach the starting point. So as we have no increases or decreases in row 11, the count will remain the same. So in 10th row if you have 40 stitches, in 11th row also we will have same 40 stitches. Now I am making the last single stitch of the 11th row. Now remove the stitch marker and let's start making the 12th row. Remove the stitch marker, into the next stitch, begin with 1 single stitch and then put the stitch marker back. Now for the 12th row the pattern is 4 single stitch, decrease and 4 single stitch. First single stitch is already completed, so that's the second single stitch, 3 and 4. So 4 single crochet, and then we have to make 1 invisible decrease. So insert the needle into the front loops of the next 2 stitches at a time. Take the yarn and drop a loop. Yarn over and make a single stitch. That's the invisible decrease. And now make 4 more single stitch. That's 1, 2, 3 and 4. So 4 stitch, decrease and 4 stitch, and this pattern have to be repeated for 4 times throughout the row until you reach the starting point. And by the end of the 12th row, we will have 36 single stitches. So here the 12th row is completed. Remove the stitch marker and let's start making the 13th row. Begin with 1 single stitch. Put the stitch marker on this stitch to mark the beginning of 13th row. And then continue to make 1 single stitch in each and every stitch throughout the row. So in 13th row also we will have 36 single stitches. Now after completing the 13th row, remove the stitch marker and let's start making the 14th row. Begin with 1 single stitch and put the stitch marker, and for the 14th row pattern is 7 single stitch and decrease. So let's continue. That's 1 which we have already done when we put a stitch marker, and this one is second single stitch, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 single stitch, and in the next stitch we will make a decrease. So again we are doing the same invisible decrease. Insert the needle into the front loops of next 2 stitches, drop a loop and then make a decrease. And now repeat this pattern of 7 stitch and decrease throughout the row until you reach the starting point, and we'll have to repeat it 4 times. So here I am making the last invisible decrease of the 14th row, and by the end of this row we will have 32 single stitches. Now remove the stitch marker and let's start making row 15. Begin with 1 single stitch and now put the stitch marker back to mark the beginning of the 15th row. Now that's 1 single stitch, and now let's continue to make 1 single stitch in each and every stitch throughout the row until the starting point. So the count we will have in 15th row is also 32 single stitches. Continue to make one stitch until the starting point. And this completes the 15th row. Remove the stitch marker and let's start making the 16th row. Begin with one single stitch and put the stitch marker back to mark the beginning of 16th row. The pattern is 3 single stitch, decrease and 3 single stitch. So we have already completed the first single stitch. This is the second one and the third one. That's 3 single stitch. And now make one invisible decrease. Into the front 2 loops of next 2 stitches, make a decrease. Now make 3 more single stitches. So that's 1, 2 and 3. So this pattern repeated throughout the row until the starting point to complete the 16th row. And we have to repeat this pattern for 4 times. By the end of the 16th row, we'll have 28 stitches. Remove the stitch marker and let's continue 17th row. Make one single stitch and put the stitch marker back. And this marks the beginning of the 17th row. And for the 17th row, we have to make one single stitch in each and every stitch. So that's one stitch in the next one and one stitch in the later one. Likewise, continue to make one stitch in each and every stitch throughout the row until you reach the starting point. And by the end of the 17th row, we will have 28 stitches. Remove the stitch marker and let's start making the 18th row. Begin with one single stitch and put the stitch marker back. And this marks the beginning of 18th row. And for the 18th row, the pattern is 5 single stitch and 1 decrease. So let's continue. That's second single stitch, 3, 4 and 5. After 5 single stitches, let's make a decrease. Into the front 2 loops of next 2 stitches, make a decrease. And repeat this pattern of 5 stitch and decrease throughout the row for 4 times until you reach the starting point. So here I am making the last decrease of 18th row, and by the end of the 18th row we will have 24 stitches. Remove the stitch marker and let's start making the 19th row. One single stitch, put the stitch marker back, and this marks the beginning of 19th row. Continue to make one single stitch in each and every stitch until you reach the starting point. And so in 19th row also we will have 24 single stitches. Now remove the stitch marker. Let's continue the pattern. Let's make row 20. Begin with one single stitch. Put the stitch marker back. So the pattern for 20th row is 2 single stitch, decrease and 2 single stitch. We have already done the first single stitch. This is the second single stitch. So 2, and now we will make a decrease. So that's a decrease, and make 2 more single stitches. This is the first repetition, and we are going to repeat this pattern for 4 times in the row. So that's the first repetition, 2 single stitch, decrease and 2 single stitch. Now we are doing the second repetition. So that's 1, 2 and then invisible decrease, and again 1 and 2. That's the second repetition. Repeat it for 2 more times until the starting point. And this completes the row 20 with 20 single stitches. Remove the stitch marker and let's start making row 21. For row 21, we are going to make one single stitch in each and every stitch throughout the row. So if you wanted a wider join or wider part at the center, you can stop the pattern after this row, or if you wanted a narrower center, you can just continue with the rest of the pattern. So after row 21, we will have 20 single stitches. For the wider center, you can stop the pattern here. If not, now continue with the row 22. Remove the stitch marker, make one single stitch, put the stitch marker back, and this marks the beginning of row 22. And for this, 3 single stitch and decrease will be the pattern. So let's continue. That's the second single stitch and then the third single stitch. Now we make a invisible decrease. And we are going to repeat this pattern of 3 single stitch decrease throughout the row for 3 more times. So we will have a total of 4 repetitions. And by the end of this row, we will have 16 single stitches. So row 22 is completed. Now let's continue to make row 23. Remove the stitch marker, begin with 1 single stitch. Put the stitch marker back. And now for this row, let's continue to make 1 single stitch in each and every single stitch. So in this row 23, we will have 16 single crochet stitches. Continue to make until the starting point. Once the last single stitch is completed, remove the stitch marker, and now we are going to finish the first part of the project. So insert the needle into the next stitch, take the yarn and come out of all the loops on the hook, which means we are making a slip stitch. Once the slip stitch is completed, make chain 1 and leave a long tail end before you fasten off. So if you are making it as a keychain, leave up to 1 meter of length, and if you are making it for a car hanging, a minimum of 2 meters would be good enough. And then fasten off, make a knot, and this part will give you a nice funnel shape. Now let's add stuffing into the project. Take a good amount of fiber fill and stuff it firmly so that it holds a good shape. The stuffing should not be overstuffed and also it should not be understuffed. If it's understuffed, the shape will not retain so longer, and if it is overstuffed, the shape will look bulged out instead of looking nice. So once the stuffing is completed, I am taking the help of a white color yarn or a semi-white color yarn and insert the needle onto the first stitch and also one of the front loops on your 8th row. And then insert the needle back into the next stitch and then insert the needle onto the row 23 as shown in the video. So we are just adding a zigzag pattern onto the project. Again, top to bottom into the next stitch, count 6 stitches, and into the 7th stitch insert your needle from the front and insert the needle from the back side to give you another zigzag line, and repeat it throughout the row until the pattern is completely having a zigzag pattern on top of it, and this will add a little detailing for our Damarukam pattern. So just follow the video and continue to make it. So here I have adjusted the last zigzag pattern. So the starting thread, I have removed it from the first place and I am inserting this thread into the next stitch as shown in the video. Now this completes the first part of the Damarukam pattern. If you see, the shape of the lines are nicely aligned with the project and it's looking nicely defined with a good amount of stuffing. Now we are going to repeat the same thing for the second part of the project and also stuff the second part completely. Now we will have 2 identical shapes. Now let's attach these 2 parts together, and before we continue, I'm just going to finish off the threads of the white color yarn. So make a couple of knots so that the detailing will be fixed in its place, and then trim the excess thread leaving a small tail ends. We can just add the tail end into the stuffing part. We don't have to actually sew in those edges. Now the long tail end which we have cut for the first part, take that yarn into the tapestry needle. Now align both the parts next to each other and insert your hook into the back loop of the last row on the second part. So this is how we are going to make a join. Now from top to bottom, insert your needle only into the back loops of the next 2 stitches on both the top and bottom parts, and then pull the yarn. And now from bottom to top, again into the back loops of both and pull the yarn out. Again the next 2 stitches on top and bottom, draw the yarn from top to bottom, or just simply follow the video so that you will not get confused. Only into the loops, only one loop on either side, insert the yarn and pull out the thread. Once you are done with a couple of stitches, pull the thread tightly so that both the halves will come closer to each other and will get tightly attached with each other. Now continue the same thing throughout the row until the starting point, but just give it a pause when you have a couple of stitches to be completed. So here is when I am going to attach a little bit of more fiber fill to give the stiffness to the attached part or the center part. And once it is done, attach the last couple of stitches, and then we are going to secure it by making a couple of knots. Once the knotting is done, we still have a long tail end, and this tail end I am going to make a long chain which will make the hanging thread for our Damarukam. You can make it as a keychain or a car hanging. For keychain, a minimum of 20 chains will be good enough, and for car hanging you need to make 100 chains, and that is why we are leaving a long tail end while we are finishing off the first part. So once the keychain part is completed, you can take the excess thread from the last slip stitch and insert it into the stuffing part, and after that you can just trim the excess thread close to the project. Make sure you are not trimming any of the threads from the project, only trim the excess thread. So the base of Damarukam is now completed. Now let's add the tassels part for this. I am taking the brown color yarn again. I am going to make a chain 40 or 45. Depending upon the yarn thickness, this count might vary. So I am just making chain 45, a long chain which will go around the center part of the Damarukam. Once it is done, fasten off and make a knot. Now we will have the starting and finishing tail ends, and we are going to attach that, and before that I am going to add small beads to the end of these tassels, and for that I am again using a tapestry needle. So take the starting tail end into the tapestry needle and attach both the beads as shown in the video. So once you are attaching both the beads, pull it from the back side again into the inwards and secure it by making a simple knot. And once the knot is completed, you can trim the thread, or what I am doing is take the tail end and insert it back into the bead. Again I am making one more knot just to make sure to be safe. And once the knot is completed, put the yarn back into the beads and then trim the thread close to the project. So this way the beads will be nicely secured and we don't have to apply any other glue. And repeat the same thing on the other side as well. Now let's assemble. Wrap the chain around the center part, and once it is wrapped for a couple of times, you can check the length, adjust it and secure it at the bottom part of the Damarukam by making a couple of knots at the bottom. This completes the Crochet Damarukam project. I hope you all enjoyed watching this tutorial. Do give this pattern a try and let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. The written pattern is given in the description. Do check it out. Don't forget to share your work to me on Instagram. See you all in the next video. Thank you for watching. Please like the video, share it and subscribe to DIY Crafts.